All right, so I don't have to worry about all that. Okay, so sensation and perception. All right, sensation refers to all of the information that is coming into our sensory receptors, sensory receivers, whatever, at any given time. Okay? So all of the information, every bit of touch, every bit of smell, every bit of sound, every bit of sight, all the information that's coming in, whether it's light waves, sound waves, whatever, okay? All that refers to, all right, sensation. Sensation is objective. Okay? Sensation's objective, meaning like all of us are experiencing the same thing right now. Like all of us, the same thing is coming in to all of our sensory receptors. However, our understanding of it or our perception of it, right, differs from person to person. Okay? As I said, you need to be on time to these because like I can't just be going back and forth the whole time. Okay. All right, I don't think you really need to know prosopagnosia. So, we're going to start off talking about information coming in, and then we'll talk about how we perceive it. All right, bottom-up processing, or what is also referred to as feature analysis. Okay? Bottom-up processing refers to information that is coming into our sensory receptors. And hold on one sec. Okay. All right. Refer information that is coming into our sensory receptors that we take, and from this information that's coming in, we build a perception of whatever it is that we are looking at, whatever looking at, hearing, whatnot. Okay? So it's bottom-up processing refers to things that start at the sensory receptors and then build up to higher level processing. This is what we do for the most part, like when we are having some sort of new experience. All right, I don't know why I can't write. No. When we're having some sort of new experience with something. So building sensation followed by perception. Oh, that's why. Hold on one sec. Sorry, guys. God damn it. Come on. There we go. All right. Top-down processing refers to how we use prior experience and expectations to build perception. Okay? So essentially using like mental shortcuts. Okay, that's not going to work. Yeah, by the time, as we gain more and more experience, most of what we do is top-down processing. When you have certain expectations for things that can predispose you to think certain things about things, this is where most of what we've talked about in this class has been top-down processing. Okay, how our expectations, how our brain puts things together to fit our expectations. Okay? All right. What do we notice versus what don't we notice? Okay, so just because sensory information is coming in doesn't mean that we always perceive it. What we perceive is based on what we are looking for, what we are trying to pay attention to. Okay? And a lot of the stuff comes in and it is not even attended to. It comes in and as soon as it comes in, it is out. Okay? This is called selective attention. Selective attention is just what are you focused on at any given time and what are you tuning out. Cocktail party effect is when you're able to hear something like listen to a conversation very clearly, even in a very loud room. Okay? All right, a couple different types of selective attention. Inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness is just missing things because we're just not looking for them. And then change blindness is failing to notice small changes in the environment. Okay, so if you fail to notice that, the lights have been turned down a little bit, or if I walked out of the classroom, if I walked out of the classroom, put on a different shirt, and came back in, there's a very good chance that people would not even notice that I put on a different shirt because you're not looking for it. You're not expecting it, and so therefore you're probably not going to notice it. All right, so I don't know why the formatting on this got all weird. All right, and then a term that goes along with top-down processing, perceptual set. A perceptual set is just any situation where a person, where you are predisposed to notice one thing over another. All right, and this could have to do with the context of what you are looking at. Okay, if you don't notice somebody walk into a classroom because your perceptual set is focused on the teacher, all right, okay, your emotions at the time, your motivations, okay, if we look down at this one right here, if you look at it vertically, you're more likely to see a B in the middle. If you look at it horizontally, you're more likely to see a 13 because of the context of what you were looking at. If I tell you with the other picture, hey, this is a picture of the Loch Ness Monster, you're more likely to see the neck of the Loch Ness Monster than if I just say, hey, what are you looking at right here? Okay, so perceptual set is just creating a way of making it more likely to notice one thing over another. All right. So, okay. All right. So transduction, talking about getting information from sensory receptors, sensory neurons, to interneurons, to the brain. The process of transforming physical energy, okay, such as light waves, into a neural message is called transduction. Okay? Turning a physical energy into the brain's electrochemical communication that we talked about, yesterday. Essentially, how does a light wave trigger an action potential? And then the study of this is called psychophysics. Okay? All right, now, what we notice and what we don't plays out, selective attention plays a big role in this, but there is times when information, when physical energy coming in just does not hit, it just is not intense enough for it to even be able to be sent to the brain. This is called absolute threshold. Okay? Absolute threshold is the minimum sensory stimulation that neurons need to be aware of the sensation. Okay? Essentially, we'll say the light wave has to hit the neural threshold. And that's why, like certain light waves, like we cannot see everything in the light spectrum because our neurons just simply can't pick up certain degrees of the light spectrum. So those degrees of the light spectrum just are not hitting our absolute threshold. If you've ever taken a hearing test where they do the little beeps, you got to raise your hand when you hear a beep. If there's a beep and you don't hear it, right, then that means that beep is not hitting your absolute threshold. Now, there is an idea that is not really provable, right? That things that fall below our absolute threshold, right? We're not consciously aware of them, but they influence us in unconscious ways. Right? When something falls below the awareness threshold, it is called subliminal. Right? Meaning it is, in theory, affecting our subconscious. There is very little evidence there's some evidence, but it's really hard to prove because it's unconscious. They do know that subliminal sense, so smells that fall below our absolute threshold for perception, but our brain they're still going to our brain, that subliminal sense can influence our thought processes, behavior, and whatnot, but there's not a whole lot of evidence that other things that are subliminal can. Okay? All right, now, so we have the absolute threshold, which is the minimum stimulation neuron needs for physical energy to be transformed into electrochemical energy. All right, but there's another theory that goes more along with top-down processing that says, well, there is not actually any absolute threshold. That what we notice is dependent upon our selective attention. It's dependent upon our motivations. Dependent upon our state of mind. How tired are we? How distracted are we? Okay, so on and so forth. This is called signal detection theory. All right? And it just looks at, well, what are some of the signals that we detect and why? So, for instance, a new mother might be able to sleep through all these noises outside, but the second the baby starts to cry, they hear it. They're attuned to it. A firefighter might notice the smell of smoke more easily than somebody who is not a firefighter because they're looking for it. Essentially what this says is what we notice is dependent upon what we're looking for. Okay? Any questions there? Yeah. No, it's not necessarily unconscious. It's just more based on selective attention. When something, if it's unconscious, then it's subliminal. That means like it falls below our conscious awareness. This is just, we don't necessarily consciously do this, but like whatever we're focused on and then tuning out, we're more likely to notice the things that we're focused on rather than tuning out. All right. Now, not only is there absolute threshold, okay, there is what is called difference threshold, where absolute threshold looks at the minimum stimulation we need to notice something. Difference threshold, or the just noticeable difference, or the JND, is the minimum amount of change in a stimulus that we need to notice that the stimulus has changed. So, how much louder does the volume on the TV have to go up for you to notice that it has gotten louder? How much more salt do I have to put in to a soup to notice that it's gotten saltier? What the changes that we notice are very much dependent upon the intensity. Larger stimuluses, more intense stimuluses need more change to notice than smaller ones. Okay, that's why it's a lot easier to notice when a guy gets their haircut, right, versus when a girl gets their haircut. And now I have on here that it says amount. Right? This is actually based on not a set amount, but on a set percentage. Okay? So with difference threshold is governed by Weber's law. It doesn't apply to all of them, but for the purpose of this class it does. It says, for us to notice a difference in a change in intensity of a stimulus, it differs by a constant percentage. So like for us to notice that something has gotten brighter, it has to get 8% brighter or 8% dimmer. For us to notice that something's gotten heavier, it has to get 2% heavier. So if you have a 10-pound weight and you want to make it heavier, you just add 0.2 pounds to it. But if you have a 100-pound weight and you want to make it heavier, you add 2 pounds to it. So Weber's law says it's not a constant amount, it's a constant percentage. And because the amount is going to go up as the intensity of the stimulus goes up. Okay? All right. Anybody got any questions about any of that? Okay, sensory adaptation. When our sensory receptors are exposed to stimulation over a long period of time, eventually what is going to happen is they are going to stop responding to that stimulation. They adapt to it. Eventually they just tune it out. Think of your masks, especially people in person. Like, most of the day, you probably don't even notice that you have a mask on, okay? Because you've adapted to it. Okay? All right? If you stare at something for long enough, It'll disappear. Okay, our eyes adapt to it. Stare at something for a while. Eventually, your brain, your sensory, your rods and cones just essentially stop reacting to it, and it will just disappear in front of your eyes. And then when you move your eye, it'll come back. Right? And then sensory interaction. Okay, all of our senses work together to give us a full picture. Vision is the most important. Okay, vision dominates all other senses, all visual capture. But sensory interaction is when our full perception of something is dependent upon what we see, what we smell, what we taste, so on and so forth. That's why little kids think that red M&Ms taste different than brown M&Ms because they believe that the color has a certain taste. Okay, flavor is a combination of the smell and the taste of something. All right. Does this also have to do with color bias? I don't know what color bias is, so I don't know. Okay. Like certain color tastes better. Yeah. Well, it's the colors that we associate with things. Unless you have synesthesia, colors don't really have taste. But it's colors that you associate with certain things. Like we associate red with more fruits and whatnot. So, all right. As I just said, visual capture is vision tends to dominate all other senses. The McGurk effect, if you remember that's the ba 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 ba. And even though we're hearing the same thing, our brain perceives it differently because of how we see the person's mouth move. All right. As I said, I'm not going to go back over this whole process of you can look this over. All right, it's not that hard. Accommodation, lens changing shape to depending on the distance at which we are looking at something. Okay, it accommodates. That's why if you put your finger out in front of your face and then have a wall behind it, if you focus on your finger will be clear, the wall will be blurry. If you focus on the wall, okay, you're probably going to see two fingers and they will be blurry, but the wall will be clear because your eye is changing what it is looking at. So the lens changes shape. Rods and cones. Okay, rods and cones, photoreceptors in the retina. Rods respond to dim lighting, black and white. Okay, and they are for the most part in the periphery of the eye, meaning out on the edges. So that is why you can't see colors as well if you're looking at them in your peripheral vision. Cones are responsible for color vision, seeing detail in well-lit conditions, whatnot. That's why we see color better when we are in light. If the lights are out, then cones aren't as active. Okay, they are focused on the point of central. They are clustered in the middle of the retina. The point of central focus called the fovea. Okay. Make sure you know bipolar cells. Bipolar cells are where transduction occurs. So the communication between photoreceptors and bipolar cells, photoreceptors, rods and cones, activate bipolar cells, which are a type of neuron. So the transduction occurs between the photoreceptors and the bipolar cells. Photoreceptors are not neurons, they are just they're different types of cells. Okay. All right, and then, yeah, so there's that. Okay, color vision. Rods, cones, two theories of color vision. Both of them are correct. They just explain color vision in different areas. So, there we go. All right, Young-Helmholtz trichromatic theory. Trichromatic means three color. Young-Helmholtz says that we have three different types of photoreceptors in the retina. We have three different photoreceptors that are responsible, that are activated by three different wavelengths of light. We have ones that are sensitive to light that is in the red part of the spectrum. We have ones that are sensitive to light that is in the blue part of the spectrum. It's like low wavelength. I can never remember. Okay, and then light that is sensitive to wavelengths in the green part of the spectrum. And all these three cones, when activated, right, activated by different types of light, right, they send in different intensity signals. All right, the signals that they send are of this different intensity to the bipolar cells, and that helps us be able to see different colors. It's basically like if you combine, if you mix red and green, or mix yellow and blue together, you get green. Although it doesn't really work like that. But if you think about it like a printer, like printer is like magenta, cyan, and okay. So for instance, when red and green are stimulated, we actually see yellow, and because it's wavelengths of light. Trichromatic theory helps explain color blindness. People that are colorblind generally cannot see red or green. That is the most common type of color blindness. They either have red cones that are sensitive to red or cones that are sensitive to green, but they don't have both of them. So actually, with it, usually everything, if they don't have green cones, generally stuff that's green is going to look more red to them, and vice versa. More common in males. Sensitive meaning they pick up that wavelength, so you can see it. All right. The other theory that explains how these cones pick up wavelengths, they activate bipolar cells, and then these bipolar cells, these neurons, send the light signals, and this is where it has turned into a neural message. Okay? So opponent process basically says that neurons in the retina, meaning in the bipolar cells, and in the thalamus and in the optic nerve, are just like certain neurons are only respond to certain neurotransmitters. Certain neurons, these neurons, the ones that are sensitive to color, they come in pairs. They are sensitive to either red or green, blue or yellow, or black or white. Okay? But red and green cannot fire at the same time. Blue and yellow can't fire at the same time. And so what happens is, if there is a blue signal, okay, if there's a blue signal, then the blue is firing and yellow is inhibited. Okay, because the opponents. Okay, if there's a green signal, then red is inhibited. That's why there's no such color as reddish green or bluish yellow. And people always say, well, what about gray? Gray is not an actual color, I don't think. Right? I don't think it is. Gray is, I think, the combination of our eyes seeing white and black and go back and forth the whole time. Like right here, that's why you see the little black circles at the intersections of the white lines. Because the black cone, the black and white neurons are firing on and off and on and off in quick succession right there. All right? Opponent process theory is it helps explain after images. So what happens is when one color fires, after a while of firing, it gets tired. And so if it's firing for a while, and then you look away from it, what is actually going to happen is that color is going to stop firing, and the opponent color is going to fire instead, so that the color can recharge. That's why if you stare at this flag for long enough and then look at a white screen, you will actually see a red, white, and blue flag. Okay, because those are the opponent colors there. Okay. All right, so both of these are considered accurate. All right, parallel processing, just a term. Our ability to process motion, shape, color, all those things at once. All right, we are almost done. All right, perceptual organization. All right, early field of psychology called Gestalt. Gestalt psychology, Gestalt is German for whole. These theorists hypothesize that our brain sort of automatically organizes things into meaningful wholes. Rather than looking at individual parts and building a perception from there, rather than bottom-up processing all the time, our brain usually looks at the full picture and puts it together to make sense of it. Okay, the whole may exceed the sum of its parts. That's why most of you all, when looking at this picture, you can look at it and very quickly see a dog right there. All right, even though it is just a grouping of black dots. Gestalt psychology. So they're what are called these different grouping principles. So one of the main ones you need to know with Gestalt, they actually like using this on FRQs, is figure ground perception. Figure ground perception is literally just how we organize things based off of what we are looking at or what we are listening to, right, versus the background of it. The figure is what we are looking at, what we're listening to, whatever. The ground is everything that goes in the background. So essentially, we could call this like what we are, selectively attending to. There are also the Gestalt principles of grouping, how we organize things, and how we make meaningful wholes even when there is not a meaningful whole. Proximity is when things are close together, we tend to group them together. We tend to assume things are together when they are close to one another. Continuity is where even if we don't see something, even if like one thing is blocking another thing, we perceive the thing that is being blocked as being continuous. And we like to see continuous patterns like right here, without the colors making this distinct, okay, you would see that as one line of circles and that as one line of circles. All right, we see that as a continuous line right there. We see an NC right there, even though there's not really one. So we want to make things as continuous as possible for our brain to make sense. All right, and then finally closure. Closure, even if there are gaps, our brain fills in the visual and auditory information, which is why you see a triangle right there. Okay, or if I go like this, even if you didn't clap, everybody clapped in their mind right there. Okay, that's closure, because you just filled in the gap. Okay. All right, depth perception. Okay, depth perception is obviously our ability to see in 3D. Experiment that you could be asked about, done by, I believe her name was Eleanor Gibson, I think. Okay, visual cliff experiment. They put babies that could crawl on top of a checkerboard pattern on a table, and they had the full checkerboard pattern here to see at what age babies could perceive depth. And they found that it was actually earlier than they thought. But what was interesting was sometimes the babies would be able to perceive depth, and they could tell because their heart rate would increase when they got close to the edge, but they would still crawl over the edge up until about 6 months or so, because they hadn't learned yet that crawling over the edge could be bad, like that they could get hurt. So there are two types of depth perception. We have two depth perception systems. We have the biological one and the environmental one. Binocular cues are depth cues that use both of the eyes and therefore rely on our biology. There are two of these. Retinal disparity. Okay, our eyes aren't on top of one another. They're next to each other. Therefore, each eye sees something slightly different. Okay? You can demonstrate this again if you put your finger out in front of your face and focus on the wall behind it. You should see two fingers. Okay, because it's coming in both eyes, but your brain isn't putting it together. All right, retinal disparity is a depth cue. Is the bigger the difference between the two retinal images, the closer something is. So if you do this, okay, if you have your finger up in front of your face and both your eyes open and look past it and then slowly move your finger outwards, the two fingers that you see should look like they are getting closer to each other. Even though they are not, it's just they're getting further away, and when stuff is further away, both of our eyes can focus on it better. Convergence is how much are your eyes having to look inward to look at something? Okay? If I put my finger in front of my nose like this and I try to focus both eyes on it, your retina, your eyes are converging inward, essentially like crossing your eyes. The more they're converging inward, the closer something is to you. Okay? All right. The other type of depth perception is monocular cues. And I can't. Okay. Monocular cues are depth cues that we only need one eye for. They are environmental. They're used a lot in art, in painting. Okay. Ways that we perceive depth without having to use both eyes. Relative size. Things that we see as smaller, we perceive as being further away. If the retinal image is smaller of something, then that tells us that it's further away. You can still understand that even with one eye. Relative height. When something's in our visual field, if this is our visual field and something is higher up in our visual field than something else. So if I'm looking at these desks right here, the desk that, what's her name? What? Ella. The desk that Ella is at looks like it is higher up than the desk right here. Therefore, that tells me that it's further away. Interposition. When one thing is blocking another thing, that tells us the thing that's blocking it is closer. Okay? I can see part of the chair behind Elizabeth, but I can't see all of it. Therefore, I can tell that Elizabeth is closer to me than that chair is. And then linear perspective. When we have two parallel lines, okay, parallel lines going off into the distance will look like they are going to converge even if they are not. Even if they stay parallel, they will look like they're going to converge. You just think like railroad tracks. We don't need to worry about those. All right, not important. Perception. All right, perceptual constancies. Our brain, we tune out like extra information that we don't need. And our brain, even if the visual, even if the visual image of something changes in either in shape, size, or color, we understand that it likely has not actually changed. Okay, so, if I open up a door, right, the retinal image of that door has changed, but we know that the door has actually stayed the same shape. Same thing with size. Okay, if I walk away from you and I'm getting smaller, you know that I'm not actually shrinking. It's just the retinal image that has changed. These are called perceptual constancies. Our brain just tunes it out. It says, oh, shit, it's staying the same. We also color as well. Even if the retinal image of a color changes, like if I turn off the lights, okay, you know that even though the actual color you're perceiving is different, the color has actually stayed the same. All right? And this is actually very relative to the brightness of objects surrounding it as well. And that is where we get the famous, is the dress blue or black or white or gold? All right? Anybody from my class or remember why some people perceive it as blue and black and some people perceive it as white and gold? Long time ago. The lighting. It all has to do with what type of lighting you perceive around it. If you think that it is outside, like natural light, you perceive it in one way. If you think that it's non-natural light, you perceive it in a different way. I can't remember which it is, but okay. All right, here's another like cool one. Okay, and you can see how the brightness of surrounding things changes the context of a color. Okay, if you look at this one right here and that box and that square right there, okay, this one looks like it is darker. However, they are both the exact same color. Okay, it is just how we perceive it based on the shadows surrounding it. Okay, same thing there. And all right, the gray bar in the middle is all the same color. Sensory deprivation. Okay, being deprived of using one of our senses at a young age can make it so those neurons never develop. Okay, so if you have like cataracts of cloudiness in the eye, cause you not to be able to see as well. If you have them at a young age, even if you get them removed, your vision will probably not be all that good. Having sensory deprivation at a younger age is obviously going to be more impactful. They did this experiment with kittens where they raised them in barrels that only had vertical lines in them, and when they took them out, the cats couldn't perceive horizontal lines, and they would just run into shit. Okay, all right, perceptual adaptation. Our brain kind of just accounts for differences around us. Constancies, perceptual constancies are a form of adaptation, especially with vision. So inversion goggles are an example of this. If you were to wear goggles like the ones that I have in here that flip everything upside down, it'd be tough to go about your business for a while. But after a little bit, your brain would they actually did this experiment. Your brain, you'll see it for upside down for a while, right? But after a while, your brain will actually flip it back right side up. And even though it's coming in upside down, you're seeing it right side up. We adapt to faces. This is why the amount of faces the types of faces we are exposed to help us in being able to recognize people. Right? If you're a white person and you're only around other white people, right, you adapt to those faces so you're able to distinguish them more easily. But if you're never around like black people, then you might actually have a harder time specifically recognizing other races. All right, so I'm not going to go over all these. Just know transduction in the ear occurs in the cochlea with hair cells. Oh, I will go over real quick. All right, with touch, we have 4 different types of touch receptors in our skin. Okay, we have cold, warm, pressure, and pain. And actually, the feeling of hotness is a combination of cold and warm being activated at the same time. How do we perceive pain? Well, pain is there's a lot of different factors that go into pain, but one of the theories about pain signals being making it to the brain is what is called gate control theory. Gate control theory basically says that, all right, so let's say that we got a guy here, all right, and that's his, actually, there's his spine. And let's say that there's his foot, let's say that he stubs his toe, and so those pain signals travel up the spine, right? If the pain signal is strong enough, and there's enough what's called substance P, right, then that pain signal travels up to the brain, and you're able to feel pain. But we have small nerve fibers that send pain signals to the brain, and then large nerve fibers that can block those pain signals. And so if you stub your toe, all right, and it hurts like shit, okay, the best thing to do, all right, is rub it. Because what happens is rubbing it creates a competing stimulation, and it activates large nerve fibers, and those large nerve fibers block the pain gates. They close the pain gates so the pain signal can't reach the brain. Okay? All right. Any questions there? All right. Smell, just know olfactory bulb. Taste, know the 5 different types of taste: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. Vestibular sense is balance. And kinesthesis is our ability to know where our body parts are located without having to look at them.